and welcome to Rainbow. Oh, I didn't like that, actually. I'm going to take that back. Let's just do a quick rewind.
I liked that.
Oh, did you? I'm leaving this in.
Leave it in and start again.
Okay. Hello and welcome to Rainbow History class, the queer and trans history that you don't get in school. My name is Rudy Jean Rigg.
And my name is Hannah McElhinney, and I love your brat eyes.
They're not brat eyes, Hannah.
They're brat eyes.
I'm concerned for you because these are actually fluorescent yellow and not green.
Okay, blame it on the lighting, but they look green to me. But
Actually they do in the monitor.
There we go.
All
there
right.
we go, brat eyes.
I'm happy to be an honorary brat.
Thank you so much for tuning in and spending another hour or so with us wherever you're listening from. We got some really nice reviews recently.
Oh my God.
So this is your sign to, if you do like this podcast, please leave us a review and maybe a rating, maybe follow as well, because it really, really helps us. Plus it gives us a little pep in our step when we're feeling downtrodden by the internet.
I mean, look, it has been a while since we've been in the studio. I did just realize as we got out of the car before Hannah, it has been a whole month, which it doesn't actually, has it been 5 weeks?
It might have been 5 weeks because we did record a few episodes at once. And every time we do that, we think, wow, we're going to be so ahead and like protect, ourselves in case somebody gets like sick or can't record or loses their voice.
Did happen. I was sick for 4 weeks.
You did?
4 weeks. I had 2.5 weeks of the flu and then I had 2.5 weeks of a terrible, terrible ear infection, which my doctor told me I could have burst my eardrum, which was very concerning.
That is concerning. So I'm glad that we did that, but happier than ever to be here. And I'm excited because I don't know what happened, but I woke up and I was like, I want to talk about bisexuality for an hour.
I mean, that's fair.
Totally.
Yeah, let's get into it. What are we talking about?
Well, I think we're going to have like, I was been playing with a pun because I'm like, it's a biography. As in the history of bisexuality.
Is a biography.
It's a biography. That's exactly right.
Okay. No, I get it now.
But I do think that discourse-wise or online-wise or just something that I've noticed thanks to confirmation bias, I assume, that we are in the middle of a bi renaissance. I think so. I think so because I think what is happening is a lot more public awareness and knowledge of bisexuality and bi-erasure, and we're seeing in culture it kind of wrestling with, in particular, and maybe my corner of the internet, but like wrestling with lesbian culture as well. So we'll see kind of conversations around compulsory heterosexuality and a lot of really valid discourse about, is this comphet? That's what the kids call it. Is it valid bisexuality? And I think a lot of people that are working through their identity at the moment are kind of stuck with that.
Yeah, because I did notice in the comment section of like the videos that came out when we did the episode on comphet were like, but what about bisexuals? And I'm like, sing it louder, sister. I know. Like, that's what I was saying in the episode. Like, I was just like, Like, yeah, so it is interesting, I guess. Sorry, I must say, when you said bisexual renaissance, my mind instantly flashed back to being like 13, 14, and all of these girls were, because obviously I was in like a girls' stream at school, were like, yeah, I'm bi. And like, I'm putting it on, but they were like, yeah, I'm bi. And like, I kissed a girl at a party last weekend. And like, they were kind of like, innocently and accidentally almost like not fetishizing, but like they were kind of like rolling with bisexuality in like a bit of a teenage way. And I was like, oh God, they're doing that again. But like, I guess I'm wrong.
I mean, I think year-wise, were we in the 2000s?
Yes.
Okay. So I also experienced a really tough relationship with bisexuality in a similar way in the 2000s. And I want to pick up what was happening there because I think some of the biphobic attitudes that I've seen have directly been spawned from late 90s and early to mid 2000s media frenzies.
Interesting. Because I think I don't know if I want to like talk about it now because I don't want to like jump the gun, but like I feel like I came from like a slightly different perspective, which is really interesting. And I don't know whether I should like chat about it now or wait.
Maybe hold it. But
Okay.
I'm interested because I remember you came out as bisexual when you were quite young. Is that right?
Yes, when I was 10 or 11.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I was maybe fresh 11.
Okay.
I was in year 7 though.
Yeah. So you had obviously a knowledge about what it is. And
Yes.
I'm curious, did that label stick?
No, it didn't last because back in those days, it was hard because sexuality hadn't really ingratiated itself with knowledge about gender identity. And so it was quite separate. And so when you said, and this is back in like say 2009, I'm talking about, when you said that you were bisexual, it didn't include trans people. And what I found very quickly as I'm laughing because like he's my best friend, but like what I found quickly was that my identity as a bisexual person came at odds with the fact that like I was in love with my best friend who was like is a trans guy. And so at that point in time, I was like, well, I can't be bisexual because what I understood and what the popular understanding of bisexuality was that it's like men or women or like both, like, you know what I mean? It's like there's no room for like gender identity to sort of exist at that time. And so I found that I had to drop that label in terms of communicating what I meant by my sexuality for something I think like pansexuality. I don't remember what I picked up. So like that's kind of where I was at.
I think it's wild that you had a sexuality at new 11. If you said the word sex to me when I was 11, my jaw would be on the floor and I would scream.
No, because that's the thing. It was never about sex because it was just like, I just have a big heart. Okay?
It was about love.
It was about love.
Yeah. No. I mean, I actually probably in hindsight did have a sexuality at 11 because Drew Barrymore. But other than that, it was very, very, it was new. So I take that back. But I think that is super interesting. And I want to talk about some of those perceptions of bisexuality as we'll get there. Like that's me saying like if you're sitting in your car or on the bus listening to this and you're like, no, that's not true. Bi didn't just mean two.
Yeah, I know. Don't worry. I know.
We're getting there.
We know.
We're getting there for you. But I guess in terms of anybody that is listening and maybe new to different terminology or kind of wrestling with this for the first time, when we do talk about bisexuality, we are talking about the attraction to one's own gender and other genders.
Yeah.
And within that, there are a bunch of other words that could be used interchangeably or with like nuanced differences. So for example, pansexual, is an attraction to a person regardless of their gender. Omnisexual is often said to be a attraction to multiple genders with a preference. And of course, bisexuality can involve a preference as well. So those terms can be used interchangeably, but ultimately with labels and things, it's whatever the hell you feel good about applying to yourself is the meaning of bisexuality. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about bisexuality. And it hasn't always meant that, because I want to go back in history. I'm going to need your rewind noise again. We're going to go back to ancient history and we're going to talk about bisexuality then. But first, it's important to say that bi-erasure, when we look at history, is massive because
it's a chasm.
It is a chasm because, firstly, when we look at periods of time where people might have had attraction to the same gender as them, well, not a great thing to do. So quite frequently, those people were considered deviant and then, given the label gay. Quite often, or whatever label was relevant at the time, quite often though, if you had a documented love affair with someone of the same gender, you might have also been married with somebody of, the opposite gender. So quite often those relationships are ignored in favor of the queer community as a whole, looking for kindred spirits in the past.
And like also as well, it's like I kind of hate it when they're like, yeah, so and so had intimate relations with multiple people of the same sex or gender, and yes, but that was just in bed. That didn't. And I'm like, hang on, like what? Like, really? Like, you're really just going to leave it there? Like, it's kind of the flattening of it really frustrates me.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing when we look at where it's still so difficult to be able to find any kind of queerness in history and kind of stand up for that when it's erased by the roommate discourse that has defined historians for quite some time. So we want to kind of say, no, like, let's not call them roommates. They were like in queer loving relationships. On the flip side though, plenty of them
were roommates.
Were, or do not roommate erasure.
No roommate erasure here, all right? We can have a loving platonic relationship that involves equitably splitting the household chores. It's possible, people.
Tell me you're asexual without telling me you're asexual. Justice for the roommates. Yeah, I'm on board with that as well because, yeah, there were plenty of roommates. We don't want to erase anyone from history, but I think, what we can say is that so often there were people that we kind of in history that we've given like the label homosexual to when like they could have been bisexual. And you had things like Hans Christian Andersen, who was kind of notably biromantic. Yeah, there are very few people in history that have, spoken out about being bisexual. However, there are some. We'll go through that.
Yeah.
But I think as well, the other thing to remember is that if you were in history, if you're alive in the past and had an attraction to, your same gender as well as other genders, there's a lot of motivation for you to not explore the relations with the same gender.
There's like a lot of barriers, like religion, like language, financial situation, particularly if you were like not a man, social standing, like one wrong move, you're out in the streets, babe.
Totally.
And there's no turning back.
Totally. So it's just easier to, if you were in the position that you were lucky enough to have any kind of attraction to the opposite sex, then that was great. That was great. You were able to kind of not be outcast from society. So maybe there were heaps of people that also had relationships with the same gender or feelings toward the same gender, but there would be no motivation or permission for them to explore that, and it was easier for them not to. So that's kind of how we find bisexuality in history. But if we go back to the first sort of articulation of it, would be in a place like ancient Greece. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
What about ancient Egypt? Why have we never spoken about ancient Egypt?
Well, I think because
that's older than ancient Greece.
Yeah. I think there is plenty. There was heaps of like in kind of ancient Egyptian literature about kind of lesbian relationships and a lot of like cases around, two men being together. But I think what the Greeks did was they really kind of made it their whole vibe.
Okay.
So they really wrote about its importance versus just like something that happened in society. Like there are different pieces of evidence.
Do you think that's because like the technology of writing was more accessible in ancient Greece comparatively to like ancient Egypt? Sorry, I'm like becoming semantical, but like
there are kind of stories and spiritual stories about kind of deities and things that had, same-sex relationships and things like that within ancient Greece within ancient Egypt. But I think it was that rise of philosophy. Having said that, thanks to the Renaissance, as in like the actual Renaissance in Europe, a lot of what happened in ancient Greece and Rome has been like really put on a pedestal.
Yeah.
So what we're getting now in a kind of a Western English speaking, colonized country is probably maybe a bias toward knowledge that came out of the Greeks.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to look into this ancient Egypt because I do realize that we've never really spoken. Well, hang on, we have done a small amount of like episodes and whatnot on ancient Egypt, but I'm dedicating some time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have, like Hatshepsut and, the two royal manicurists that were buried in a tomb together and, there's plenty there. But
sorry, I didn't mean to derail, but it really was itching my brain.
That's fine. Like if we want to go down an ancient Egyptian wormhole.
No, I want to go to Greece. Take me to Greece.
Okay,
Hannah.
we're going to go down to Greece. All right. So ancient Greece, though, what we know about the Greeks was they were really into homosexuality. That's kind of the shorthand for the Greeks. They just loved it. It's actually not true, I think, in terms of they did believe that relationships between a man and a man were like higher and more godly and more spiritual than relationships between a man and a woman, which were based on lust, the flesh. So I guess that they did have this hierarchy. Mostly that was based on sexism in the idea that like men were more intelligent than women. And so therefore their relationship was, their union was kind of spiritual and intellectual and therefore kind of like higher in the hierarchy of love than male-female relationships. However, people would engage in both.
Yeah.
So I guess, we can't look back and say, did you love that man? Did you really love that woman? We don't know. And so in that case, like bisexuality or like, engaging with different genders in different ways was really part of ancient Greek society. Similarly with ancient Rome, they had a little bit more of like a topping affiliation. But the idea as well is that most people would be in or seek heterosexual relationships, but it was totally fine to have homosexual experiences provided you were the top. So again, you could broadly look at that and say that there was either sexual fluidity, but also bisexuality as the norm. And of course, we know like in different, indigenous cultures and societies, there were multiple genders.
Yeah.
And so that would kind of play out not just in terms of like relationships between men and women, but third genders, fourth genders.
Fifth genders.
A
secret third one.
Yeah, exactly. Like a bonus gender. It's like when your Blu-ray comes with a bonus director's commentary.
Director's cut gender.
Yeah. Let's release a new gender, the director's cut. So yeah, basically that we're in ancient times. The bis are there. We're all there.
Bisexuality, aqueducts. What more could you want in life?
To be honest, not much.
Not much. Modern plumbing, it's all you need.
I think if we could bring back the aqueducts, we'd be a happier place.
I think about
actually, do we still have aqueducts? Is that the dumbest question I've ever asked?
Okay, I didn't follow this up, and I don't want to follow it up now, but I do want to put it out in everyone else's minds because it's been irking me, and I haven't had a chance to Google it. Someone told me the other day that the aqueducts were destroyed in the fall of something.
Yeah, I told you that the other day.
Did you? Was it you?
That was me.
And you said that they were destroyed and never recovered. Is that right?
No, I said that they were destroyed. I don't know if they were ever recovered, but essentially that's why high heels were invented, because in the fall of Rome, everything was destroyed. The aqueducts were destroyed, which meant that that's why ancient Rome had better plumbing and hygiene than the medieval period. And so high heels were invented because the streets were awash with essentially sewage. They just whacked it out the window. And so the wealthy people were like, do not besmirch the bottom of my dress with human excrement. I need high heels.
Okay. Well, see, now I don't need to Google it.
Yeah, but I do not know if anyone thought to bring the aqueducts back.
Okay.
So I don't know. Please let us know if you know.
No, just Google it. Don't tell me. I want to keep this in my brain until I find it out.
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. So aqueducts. We don't know. But bisexuality,
we do.
Okay. However, if you want to get to the late 1800s in Europe, we have a man named Karl Heinrich Ulrichs, who we've spoken about before. He was the dude that was like the first person to come out as gay. He called it earning, which is basically quite similar to what we might call, Uranic. That's a word that people use that comes from the same etymology. So he called it earning, but basically what was interesting is that he had another word for lesbians, dioning, and so therefore he came up with the term uranodionings for bisexuals.
Are we talking about like, and now this could be crazy, but like I'm just thinking about the words that I'm hearing. Are we talking about like Uranus?
Yes.
And then Dionysus?
Yes.
Okay.
We are.
I'm so smart.
Yeah, well, that's what he was. And I think what's interesting here is that he accepted Eurodionings as a valid and obvious kind of part of human diversity based on there being intermediate stages of physical sex. And so
first base, second base, third base. Duh.
Yeah. Yeah, there's three
I could have told you that.
There's 3 bases. I want to like put aside the clunky wording of intermediary or intermediate stages of attraction, but he was looking at intersex people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, there were people that he knew that there were people that were intersexes, or the term that they used in that time, hermaphrodites. So he just applied the same concept to sexuality. I think we will get to the fact that for so often bisexuality has been considered as like an intermediary between like gay or straight.
Wasn't there like that Sex and the City scene?
We're going there.
Are we? Okay,
we're going
good.
there. Of
Please
course,
take me to lunch.
As if I'm going to talk about bisexuality without talking about Sex in the City.
Okay, sorry. I've jumped the gun again.
You have jumped the gun. No, but I think there's this idea of like this, it's an intermediary between like the two polar opposite sexualities, and obviously we know that's not true. But what was cool about Karl Heinrich Ulrichs is that he just was kind of like, well, I feel like this. I know there's people that feel like that. And it makes total sense because I'm also aware that there are, there's a spectrum of physical sex. So I kind of like that he was the first person to kind of posit that. It's not a slam dunk, but it's pretty cool. I feel like, though, with what he thought, if we look back at him, he believed that earning people, or, gay people, we now call them, were kind of like a woman's spirit in a man's body.
Yes.
When you look at what he writes, it's potentially possible that if he was here today, he might have gone down a more gender kind of journey, because he writes a lot about being kind of like a female spirit trapped in like a man's body, and he really was like wanting to wear women's clothing and things like that. So those types of experiences mirror what I guess a lot of trans women experience. However, we don't know. We don't know. Yeah. So we have no idea. But as a result of his idea of like, earning or homosexual men were a woman trapped in a man's body, he believed that the uranodionings were people in whom the mental development had proceeded kind of partly along male lines and then just like U-turned into the female lines. So it was like a developmental thing.
So it was like a developmental like issue.
Kind of.
What the hell?
So like, you've got a female spirit developing, and then also like part of a male spirit developing, and they're like smushed together, and then you come out of the womb as a eurodioning or bisexual.
Jesus Christ.
But why I think that this is so funny is that these men were all kind of like very academic, intellectual men. Karl Heinrich Ulrichs, this happened around the turn of the century in Germany, right?
We're talking like 17th, 18th century?
So, it's turn of...
No, 18th, 19th.
19th, 20th.
Okay. Sorry. I was like too far.
So like, yeah, no, we're talking about like the late 1800s and early 1900s.
Okay, right.
This is kind of happening. But the funniest thing is the scientific rigor that was given to sexuality in general, but in particular bisexuality.
Yeah.
So like all of these different sexuality researchers in this time. So this is everyone from kind of like Freud. There was like Magnus Hirschfeld, Karl Heinrich Ulrichs, a bunch of other people. But they basically were kind of working on applying these equations where like A plus A is gay, B plus B is straight, A plus B is some other third thing.
Like a Punnett square to see if your baby's going to have brown eyes.
Kind of.
Oh my God.
And everyone was like trying to look at different equations for being bi. And it's very funny because I just keep seeing the meme of, you know, like the equations.
Oh, the woman with like the like all the Pythagorean, and like the triangles, and she's like,
it's kind of like these men. It's like they were primarily attracted to other men, so they were basically saying this type of deviance is biological, and so in that sense it shouldn't be criminal.
Isn't that funny how now it's kind of reversed and they're trying to use biology as like a weapon?
I think it is interesting, like, because my favorite thing about this is that so much of the, I guess, beliefs around bisexuality, you know, in the early 20th century was based off hermaphrodism. I believe that's the word. Sorry if it's not. Magnus Hirschfeld, the, you know, sexology pioneer, sort of looked at bisexuality as a sort of pseudo-hermaphrodism, I guess a hermaphrodism of the mind or the attraction. And so I think it basically, the validity of it came from a recognition that sex is a spectrum. I think one of these, but a little bit later, was Kinsey of the Kinsey scale.
I love a scale.
Have you heard of the Kinsey scale?
Yeah, we've done some videos on it.
Yeah, so the Kinsey scale was developed in 1948, and it basically, there was, I think it was like 1 to 6, and it ranked people from completely homosexual to completely heterosexual with the acknowledgement that most people fell somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
And then there was the category of X, which was asexual. So I think there is interesting, that was probably like an early time people were studying, I guess, asexuality. But this idea that most people fell somewhere on a spectrum between completely gay and completely straight. Alfred Kinsey, who came up with it, I'm going to show you this. So completely heterosexual to completely homosexual, but with most people falling somewhere in the middle. And so he was bisexual.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I think that was kind of a very early articulation of, you know, him understanding his experience is somewhere in the middle of, you know, homosexual and heterosexual. So here we are as kind of frustrating for bisexuality, because on one hand it was very close. It was sort of seen as a cousin to intersex or being quote unquote hermaphroditic.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Okay. And I think like, if we look at terms, we haven't seen the term bisexual yet. And that is because the first use of the word bisexual was to refer to plants.
Oh, really? Oh, I feel like I did know this.
Hermaphroditic plants.
Yes. Okay.
So plants like the trillium, which, you know, has both like a male and female sort of self-reproductive organs. No. Systems?
I studied horticulture and I can't remember it. What? I did.
Good to know.
I studied horticulture for 3 years.
Okay, hermaphroditic. The sex type of trilliums is monomorphic and only hermaphroditic. Self-fertilization, they have both a male and a female part. But basically, the term bisexual was first used to describe plants. So I think that's why there's a lot of baggage around kind of bisexuality, seen as closely associated with being intersex or hermaphroditic plants, and the idea of like both the male and the female. On the other side of things, it's kind of strictly scientific and biological, and related to, being intersex in a sense. On the other hand, you're a middling, halfway between gay and straight kind of sexuality, which, while that might be true for some people, it doesn't kind of make bisexuality feel active and valid in its own right.
No, because it's like you are two halves of one thing.
Yeah, rather than a whole other thing.
Wow, that harks back to some mid to 2010s dystopian science fiction.
Totally. Exactly. So we are so if we look at like where we are in history, we're at 1948. So we've got the 50s. So Alfred Kinsey, again, like the 50s was not a great time to be anything but,
a star in Hollywood.
Or straight.
Yeah.
If you're a star in Hollywood, you
could
have a lavender marriage and be okay, but otherwise it's best to be straight.
Yeah.
In the 1950s. No, but that was kind of cool that he was doing this research, albeit wrong.
Good for him.
I know,
I'm giving it a go.
I'm just patronizing Kinsey. No, but I actually think like no one else was kind of having these discussions, and it was validating.
Yeah.
People that weren't straight, because what he was saying is that everyone falls on the spectrum and most people are bisexual.
Wow, that's a strong claim.
It is. So now we move to the 60s and the 70s. All right. So actually forget the 60s. We'll just go straight to 1969. That's pretty much the 70s.
The moon landing.
Yeah. On the moon, everyone was bisexual.
Hey, we don't know.
We don't know.
Could be.
The astronauts that first landed on the moon might have been bisexual.
Allegedly.
We don't know that. But if we go to 1969, the Stonewall Uprising, which kickstarted the gay liberation movement, we are moving into the 70s. Now, I want to pick up on one activist who was on one of the organizers that turned the Stonewall Uprising into the gay liberation movement. One person who was part of that, I guess, committee that began the kind of Christopher Street Liberation Day movement was Brenda Howard, who was a staunch bisexual activist. She did a lot of work in the 90s, but she was kind of, she gets the name Mother of Pride because she was one of the people that kind of kicked off the Pride movement. There was a period of kind of like solidarity in terms of like that gay liberation movement. And then we look at popular culture. So in 1976, 3 pop stars came out as bisexual. David Bowie, Freddie Mercury, and Elton John. And this was...
They're starting a boy band.
They should have. I think they did, except for Elton. We've had Bowie and Queen together, but Elton wasn't there.
No.
Now, all 3 of these artists at different times had come out as gay or bisexual, or, they came out as bi and then came out as gay, or in Bowie's case, he came out as gay and then bisexual, and then said that was like his biggest regret, coming out as bisexual. And then he said he regretted saying that he was bisexual. But I think we've got 3 men that came out as bisexual in the same year. It was kind of like their sexuality was part of their bit at this time. So we were in the 70s. It was like very kind of
glam rock.
Yeah, glam rock, gender bending, sexually fluid era. Yeah, David Bowie's sexuality really confused the hell out of a lot of people. And like he was married,
Yeah.
He was married. He also had like, other relationships with other men and teenagers.
Yeah, listen.
Which we're just not going to go into.
No.
But I guess, the 1970s, that was a time for bisexuality. And I think at this period, because it was so flamboyant, bisexuality was seen as not like a bad boy thing, but like a
libertine thing.
Yeah. Like it was very kind of flashy to be bisexual.
It was cool.
Yeah, I think so. It was pushing boundaries in terms of these artists and the way that they dressed as rock stars.
Bad girl. Sorry.
Very that. They were bad girls. But like in terms of this period of time, there was a bit of criticism happening, particularly of like David Bowie from the gay liberation movement, because they were saying, hey, like it's so great that you're a pioneer in terms of your artistic style, but you aren't like doing anything for, I guess, gay liberation and not fighting as part of the cause.
Yeah, I mean, the same criticism's been said for.
I think so.
I mean, even now.
I think, yeah, even now when we do look at people that are in the public spotlight and there is a criticism of them not kind of using their platform to fight for, you know, liberation of marginalized people, which I think is, yeah, totally valid. I think you could probably say that these pop stars were not that interested in, you know, putting their careers on the line for gay liberation. But then on the flip side, like, being anything but straight in the music industry at that time was resoundingly difficult. So it's kind of, I feel like at this time there was a sense of fetishization of bisexuality. It's seen as kind of a promiscuity, which is something that bisexual people always deal with.
Well, that's the thing, yeah. And the whole, I know we haven't spoken about it yet, but like the whole like, how can you be bisexual when you're with a man? Like if you're a woman, like you're not really bisexual. And I'm like,
okay. Sounds like that's a you problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that thing of like bisexual people are like promiscuous or I think
greedy.
Yeah, greedy. Have to deal with, well, they have to deal with the idea that they're like super sexualized, have high sex drives. I think if you're bisexual, you deal with the fact that people might think that you would cheat on them or that you're never satisfied with your partner, which I think is interesting because as we move toward the 90s and we start looking at bisexual activism as separate from, you know, the gay liberation movement and the lesbian liberation movement, we do kind of get to see people push these boundaries in a really cool way until the media gets involved.
Yeah.
We're in the 80s. Bisexuality was still very little known, but one thing that activists were able to do through pushing for visibility of bisexual men in particular was around the HIV/AIDS crisis because no one was speaking to bisexual men. All of the kind of outreach was happening gay men, and the media was framing this as, well, they called it gay-related immunodeficiency before it was called AIDS. So bisexual men were being kind of like left out of the movement, left out of treatment options, and so bi activists were able to fight until that was changed.
Yeah.
So that was a huge bit of activism from the bi community. And then they continued to work hard with people like Brenda Howard. Brenda Howard wore a badge all the time that she was remembered by that said, "Bi poly switch, I'm not greedy, I know what I want."
That's good.
It was good. And so she was out like fighting for bisexual liberation, you know, through the 80s, through the early 90s. In 1993, there was a march on Washington that had previously been called like the March for Gay Liberation. Then it was like gay and lesbian liberation. In 1993, there was a really big push from the bi community to have it like LGB. The T still erased.
Making my way downtown.
Yeah, that's the T. No, but it was then called the Gay, Lesbian and Bisexual Liberation, the March on Washington in 1993. And so they were really pushing. This was also around the same time that the activists were really kind of crafting what it meant to be bisexual. In 1990, there was a publication called Anything That Moves, which is which is so good. In Anything That Moves, they were basically dispelling myths.
Myth busting.
They were myth busting around bisexuality, and it was put out by the Bay Area Bisexual Network. And so in 1990, they penned something called the Bisexual Manifesto.
Yes.
I'm going to read this to you because every time I talk about it, it's amazing because I'm like, this was literally written in 1990. And it is still I think the best definition of bisexuality. And it really was so long ago. It's just that the only people that were aware of it were
the Bay City Bisexual Network.
Yeah, who received the publication in the mail. And, you know, bisexual activists. This was an activist crowd. So I'm going to read to you
from
it.
Okay.
Bisexuality is a whole fluid identity. Do not assume that bisexuality is binary or duogamous in nature, that we must have two sides, or that we must be involved simultaneously with both genders to be fulfilled human beings. In fact, don't assume there are only two genders. Do not mistake our fluidity for confusion, irresponsibility, or an inability to commit. Do not equate promiscuity, infidelity, or unsafe sexual behavior with bisexuality. Those are human traits that cross all sexual orientations. Nothing should be assumed about anyone's sexuality, including your own. We are angered by those who refuse to accept our existence, our issues, our contributions, our alliances, and our voice. It is time for the bisexual voice to be heard. Do not expect each magazine to be representative of all bisexuals, for our diversity is too vast. Do not expect a clear-cut definition of bisexuality to jump out from the pages. We bisexuals tend to define bisexuality in ways that are unique to our own individuality. There are as many definitions of bisexuality as there are bisexuals. Many of us choose not to label ourselves anything at all and find the word bisexual to be inadequate and too limiting. Do not assume that the opinions expressed are shared by all bisexuals, by those actively involved in the bisexual movement, by the Anything That Moves staff, or the Bay Area Bisexual Network Board of Directors. What you can expect is a magazine that, through its inclusive and diverse nature, creates movement away from external and internal limitations.
That's great. I mean, I'm saying that's great because that makes sense to me.
The fact that it calls out that there are not just two genders. And so that is why I think when we say bisexuality is not an attraction to both men and women, but an attraction to your own gender and other genders. And so that came from the 90s.
That's incredible. That's really cool.
So that was 1990, right? But unfortunately, in the media, as in media other than Anything That Moves as published by the Bay Area Bisexual Network, things were looking a bit different. I want to show you from 1995 a cover of Newsweek. Can you please read this headline?
Okay.
As if it was a movie trailer.
Bisexuality, not gay, not straight, a new sexual identity emerges.
So that was the cover of Newsweek in 1995. And on the cover, there's three people, two men and a woman, looking kind of like Mulder and Scully.
Yeah, they're
trying to solve this big riddle of a new sexual identity.
That's wild.
I know.
NCIS.
I know. And so it's kind of like
more like LGB without the T.
Exactly. I feel like this is where we are in 1995.
Gosh.
Things get worse when we get to the 2000s. Because in the year 2000, the television show where a generation of people got their sexual liberation and understanding from, Sex and the City, released an episode called Girl Boy, Girl Boy. Have you seen this episode?
I think I've seen the clip of them at lunch, but I've not seen the whole episode.
In it, Carrie is dating a guy who is bisexual and has been with a man before her, and she's basically sort of freaking out about it, but she's like, no, I'm cool, I get it, or whatever. The episode ends where she's kind of a bit more open-minded, but she goes to a house party, and they're playing Spin the Bottle. and the bottle lands on Carrie, and it's a woman who has spun it. Not just any woman, Alanis Morissette.
No, really?
Yeah, she plays it. Yeah,
That's
she plays
so
the girl.
funny.
And so Carrie goes, haha, it's a girl, like thinking, oh, we're going to spin again. But then Alanis Morissette's eyes are straight on her, and Carrie realizes that she needs to kiss Alanis Morissette.
Oh my God.
Okay? Alanis Morissette crawls across the circle to Carrie, who looks downward to her right and very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So there's probably a different issue with it other than how it's framing bisexuals.
Enthusiastic consent is always necessary.
And so Carrie does go ahead and kisses Alanis Morissette.
Okay.
There's not a heap of chemistry between them.
No.
But then afterwards, she makes a beeline and exits the party.
Oh, what a shame.
Before telling the man that she's been dating that she just can't do it. This bisexuality thing is just too much for her. And so she dumps him.
Oh,
I
man.
know. And it's really like, it's kind of not his fault. One, it's kind of Alanis Morissette's fault. And two,
Really overstepped the boundaries here.
yeah, I know. If Alanis Morissette did not crawl toward Carrie and kiss
Maybe
her,
things would be different.
maybe things would be different. But I remember watching this and being really sad because one, I would have killed to be kissed by Alanis Morissette. And then also just being like, oh, bisexuality is not cool. Like they could have really written that episode in a way that made it
Cool.
fine
Yeah,
to be
fine.
bisexual. It was framed in that like kids these days, this guy was much
Oh.
younger and Carrie sort of was saying, you know, I'm too old for this. Sexual fluidity. I'm a woman. I like men.
Yeah.
Which is totally valid. I just don't know why it needed to be on the screen.
Yeah. I'm not really sure about that. I'm trying to think of like early like representations of bisexuality that I watched on TV and I can't really think. Oh, it would have been Doctor Who, John Barrowman. Like he played this like bisexual, I don't know if that was the label that was used, but he was definitely like macking on with the Doctor and whatnot. Like, and I think it was kind of like framed a little bit like slapsticky, but it wasn't because there was like intercut scenes of like earnestness, so it kind of like leveled out. I think it was pretty progressive, for want of a better word, like
Yeah.
for like 2000 whatever 8 7 whatever it was. I could be wrong. I don't know. Doctor Who exists in a silo for me, but anyway, like I think that was maybe it, maybe
Yeah,
the
I think
first
there's-
one.
Well, I feel like this is where things really start to split off because we've got Sex and the City, we had that Newsweek cover. Then in 2003, there was the three-way kiss between
Yeah.
Madonna, Christina Aguilera, who always gets left out of this story,
Yeah.
and Britney Spears. All we ever see, the images are Britney and Madonna, but this was really about bi-curiosity, bisexuality. Speaking of which, because this is like the era that like there was Queer Eye for the Straight Guy and the birth of the Metrosexual,
Oh
which
yeah.
seemed to be a man who
Had a sweeping
groomed.
side fringe and
even just took a shower without being bugged to do it.
wore some cologne, skinny
Yeah.
jeans. At least this was like
Yeah, that was the Metrosexual. But you know what came out of the 2000s, right?
Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yes.
Sorry, it just
Yeah,
came to
that's
me.
it. The term bi-curious.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do. I think it was tapering off by the time I got to high school in 2008 or 9. But I do remember it being this thing because I do remember like a teacher like explaining it maybe in like a health education class or something. But that's all it wasn't in my vernacular or being used.
I love that the term to me just like defined the generation of like being bi-curious. And I think that
It's like
really
fruity.
Yeah, but it is, but it's also just kind of like if you're bi-curious, that means that like you people would always say, oh, so and so I reckon she's bi-curious or she's a bit bi-curious, which essentially means like, I don't know, they would kiss you at a party or something like that. And I think it was on one hand acceptable. So you didn't have to kind of like out yourself as being a lesbian, which in the 2000s, you know, you still got bullied for. By curiosity, this was at the height of the emo craze as well.
Yes, that's where my head is.
I feel like with so many of those emo bands and like the gender bending that happened in that, there was a more permissibility for people to say that they were bi-curious. But like, it's just so stupid. Like, why not just say curious?
I don't
Or
know.
bisexual.
Because I think that when I think about, and this is retroactively, like thinking about how the term bi-curious was used, it was always used to denote a level of femininity. Because like when you think about it, the people that you would call bi-curious were like femme or high femme women or men who were quote unquote metrosexual, which often meant that they had a level of femininity or they were feminine but not gay coded. So like there was a difference and it was like an indescribable like coding difference and like
Interesting.
you know, like at least from my experience and from what
Yeah.
I understood, because it's like when I think about every single person that was quote unquote bi-curious, like Brendan Urie, Ryan Ross, like Pete Wentz, like all those emo guys, they were always like feminine, but not feminine in like a gay way.
Yeah, I think that was the thing because, you know, it was those men that when it was the emo craze and in my high school, I remember like it was always about the boys who wore their girlfriend's skinny jeans.
Yes.
And they wore eyeliner and they did sleep with each other, but like it was something that they did. They were all also like conventionally attractive, like all like, you know, little like Robert Pattinson wannabes or whatever, with their sweeping side fringes. And then the girls, you know, there was the ability for like, I don't know, out of sadness, depression, emo depths for girls to, I guess, make out with each other as well. But yeah, it was never something afforded to mask of center or mask presenting people.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, and I'm trying to think, like, was there a phrase that was used for people? But I think, again, it comes back to like stereotypes. Like, if you were mask presenting, it was always like you're lesbian or you're gay.
Yeah, if you're gay, yeah, you know, exactly.
Which is funny when we think of like, because and then I come back to the thought of like the term bi-curious. The way that it was also used to describe someone that perhaps had a sense of childishness or like playfulness to them, which I think it was because like people assumed that bisexuality was an immature thing, or again, like, I don't know, I can't remember the Sex and the City quote, but like that, like halfway to Gaytown, like I think that's what they said.
Stop off on the halfway to gay. And I think, you know what, I think it is hard though, because in the 2000s, like what I will say is that stopover on the way to gay like is still a valid experience for many people in the 2000s. Bisexuality, that is not what the identity is defined by. But I do think that based on how bisexuality was framed in the media as like something like, you know, you said childish or like coy, playful, naughty, like bad girl energy, there was enough kind of stuff around it that made it a bit of a safety, you know, like a cloak of safety to experiment underneath. So I know that, you know, like when I was, you know, a teenager, I might sort of use words like bi-curious or I'm bi or whatever. It did afford me a sense of safety under like the guise of being sexualized or a sexy person to be able to kind of do that or meet girls or experiment or things like that without necessarily needing to kind of come out as a lesbian, which at that time was not really kind of possible if you wanted to retain your social standing in relationships and things like that. So I do think that it was helpful at that time. I think you did get a generation of people that did use bisexuality as a stepping stone because it was more accepted than being a lesbian. Not for gay men. I think bisexual men in the 2000s dealt with a lot of stigma. It just sucks for so many genuinely bisexual people that this was the prevailing attitude of the 2000s. And then as we move toward the late 2000s, bisexuality did start getting a really, really bad rap because we know that from the lesbian community, bisexual people from about the 70s onwards were kind of kicked out by women as kind of, you know, being traitors in the same way trans men were. You know, if you were once, you know, in part of a lesbian community and then pursued a relationship with a man, you, were often like exiled from the lesbian community for kind of being a traitor. And then there was, I think, a lot of discourse where people were assuming that the word bi meaning two meant men and women. And so I do remember in kind of like the 2010s, a lot of pushback because the idea of like identifying as bisexual somehow meant that you were erasing non-binary people. Again, that's just silly.
It's silly, yeah.
That's just silly.
Yeah.
And so now I think we're in a different stage of where people are kind of saying, you know, I love that, you know, in Heartstopper, Heartbreak High, some of these series, there's, you know, more, you know, active bisexual characters that are not any of these horrible, I guess, stereotypes. Like they're not promiscuous. They're not kind of going to break up with their same-sex partner because they secretly want another one. They're not unfulfilled.
Yeah. And I think as well, like what's interesting and something that like I do want to see more of, because like obviously I'm not part of it and I'm nosy. I want to know more, I guess. But like I want to see bi culture like finally stop being stifled because of all this silly discourse. Like I just want to see like I think we have a pretty good idea of what gay culture is. I mean, it's pretty accessible in terms of like representation and whatnot. Lesbian culture, again, that's something that at least in our circles, again, accessible, and you can kind of like draw on stereotypes and there's something to kind of get you into the wormholes there. Bi culture, like,
I mean, I don't know. They've got their bobs, their tote bags, and their
I know
sockless ankles.
I know, but it's like I want I want to know more. Like where, like I wanted to see it flourish just as much, like with as much space as everyone else, you know. And
I think so.
I think this, you know,
and not be seen as kind of, you know, fighting for the same space as like lesbian or gay culture, but you know, having like, 'cause at the end of the day, it's all valid. I think there's also, you know, when you look at where we've been throughout history, there's this sense that for bisexual people, they have to, and I'm saying like, you know, and I can relate to this, having like been in relationships with men that I, you know, was kind of struggling with around, that feeling of kind of being in a straight passing relationship, but being queer and feeling like you're not able to access queer culture, and being aware that maybe you get some privilege because, you know, if you're in a straight passing relationship, what you gain in terms of, I guess, not fearing violence on the streets, you have to deal with in terms of erasure from your community. So it's a really, really kind of tough experience for a lot of bi people that I know, and elements of it that I can relate to myself.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think I have kind of experienced anything like that, mostly just because like it's funny because I don't think that okay, so it's like, you know, when we stand together and people think we're ladies,
Yes,
like, and then when I stand next to my partner Luke, who's a cis guy, like I actually don't know how people read us. Like, I don't know. I actually don't think that they read us as a couple. I think they read us as friends, because I think that
justice for roommates.
Yeah, justice for roommates. Because it's like, I feel like I'm not sure how people are reading, because I think that Luke maybe gets coded as gay because like he does suffer with like street harassment quite a bit and being called like slurs and stuff. And so like, I don't know. I think it's funny. I'm like, I don't know if someone was like, do you feel safe in your straight passing relationship? I'm like, I don't even know if it is straight passing, because I'm not really sure how people are reading me at all, like, or reading us at all. But
I'm not going to lie, Rudy, you read pretty queer.
Yeah. But that's the thing. Maybe that's why they think we're like in a mates or something.
It's funny because I think when we look at, you know, we can't just separate gender and sexuality, because I know, you know, when I've been in a relationship with a man who was bisexual, and I don't know, it was a weird time, but I got really uncomfortable with my gender and how I was presenting and being read as next to him. If society didn't exist, maybe the relationship would have been different, but like I could not handle people reading us as a heterosexual couple, or that like I was a woman based on his being a man. That made me so uncomfortable. I shaved my head. I like, you know, did all of these things. I sort of dressed differently in what I now assume was a sort of like gender dysphoria. I hated it. And yeah, that was really, really hard because of all the expectations people put on. And I think, you know, if you're queer, which is a label that I like to use, if you're queer, then whoever the hell you're dating, it's a queer relationship. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, because like I think I struggled with like myself the same. I was like in the early parts of my relationship with Luke, I was like, oh, like, how do you view me? Like, how do you see me? Like, do you see me as just like, what do you, and he's like, I don't know if this is like a neurodivergent thing on his behalf or whether it's like just his sexuality or whatever, but he was like, literally like, I just see you as a human being. I don't even think about those things. And I do remember, because we did meet on like Tinder, and his bio at the very bottom, because I would switch back and forward in between like the men and women setting. And I had no idea when I had matched with him, like what setting I had been on at the time for him to like match with me. And I remember.
Well, what's more likely, what setting was he on?
I don't know. We don't know. I think he had both.
Okay.
But anyway, like long story short, at the bottom of his bio, he had denoted his sexuality and it was word for word, bi or something, IDK. And
Now
I was like,
that is a good sexuality.
Yeah. And I was like, I always think about that because that's like, yeah, makes sense. Like I don't know.
IDK. I feel like IDK is much better than bi-curious.
Yeah, just IDK.
IDK. I think that's good because, yeah, I do feel like that's where we need to get to with this. I think that the 2000s did so much damage in the media. And what it did is the media was so much louder in the 90s and 2000s than the activism that was happening. And the really positive, incredible, kind of affirming stuff was getting drowned out by not gay, not straight, a new sexual identity emerges. And yeah, that's kind of like we're all reeling with it. And I think that younger people, as in like younger than us,
Yeah.
they don't have the baggage or the hangover from, I know I had to do a lot of like unlearning, especially if like, you know, when you start dating women and hearing quite often that like, you know, people wouldn't date a bi girl because the lesbians would think, oh, you just leave me for a guy. I think that is something that I really have encountered. And I think that there's a course correction happening, which I'm really, really glad about, where people can just be taken at their word.
Yeah. I mean, that does appear to be what's happening, which is great. Like, I think let's just have that trust up front and then figure it out later if the person ends up being a dick, you know? Like,
yeah, that's the thing. Anyone can cheat on anyone. That doesn't mean that they're like more likely to because of their sexuality. That's just like,
that's a personality problem.
Yeah, that's just a them thing.
That's a them thing. Yeah, I mean, look, it really is interesting. And it is one of those things, the discourse has, I think, changed quite rapidly and it's taken so many different turns. But like you said, I think the chokehold that media has had on the discourse up until quite recently has like meant that it's swayed the conversation a lot. And yeah, I'm super happy that representation in things like you said, like Heartstopper and Heartbreak High have, you know, helped that course correction on top of what the activism that's been happening for like 40, 50, 60, 70, however many years has already been doing. And so it's like really, I think, positive that these two big, incredible forces are like now almost like working together, hopefully. So yeah, it's really interesting. Thank you for like doing a chronological journey of bisexuality. That was cool.
Bi-ography.
I'm sorry. It's a biography.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad. Thanks for listening. It's been a long ride, but obviously an ambitious topic to do the entire history of a sexuality. And we did like barely even like scratch the surface of like all of the activists and things. But I think.
And the Bi Bob. Shout out Bi Bob.
Yeah, we can do a whole thing on the haircut, but I think, yeah, I hope that this discussion helps us all go into the corners of the internet and better navigate these kind of discussions and realize that there are so many different genders and sexualities and identities and all are completely valid and it's okay to change them and ultimately take people at their word.
Say it louder. Amen.
But where can people continue arguing in the comment section, Rudy?
In the comment section, that would be a good start. If you have actually listened all the way through, congratulations. It's quite a feat. I imagine, this episode is going to be a long one. So thanks for sticking in there. But if you've made it this way through, I would highly recommend actually checking out our Discord server. Lots of stuff happening over in there. We have got a Patreon. Don't be dissuaded by the fact that it is a Patreon because we have a free tier. So check out the free tier and that way you get access to some otherwise exclusive content as well as some free content. If you are listening to this podcast and you haven't made the safe assumption that we do in fact have an Instagram and TikTok, I'm here to tell you that we do in fact have an Instagram and TikTok and you can find us over at Rainbow History Class. Made it super easy. I would actually recommend heading and following us over there because hopefully in the coming weeks and months we do have some exciting announcements about some live shows and events and things that we've got hopefully coming up in the works. So stay tuned for that. Hannah, is there anything else?
Well, I will leave you with some parting words that I always say, and that is Rudy Jean Reg, not everything is gay, but there is gay in everything, and equally often it's bi. And on that note, bye.